We are back. Here we're talking about what's going on in Israel and war on, they call it a war, it's not a war, about Gaza. Do not have a navy or do not have an army, do not have an air forces, and they still call it a war. A lot of civilians been killed in Gaza, more than 7,000 injured, 1,300 killed. And Israel's and the Western media using the self-defense as a justification, rationalization of the massacre and the slaughtering of civilians, mostly women and children. What is international law address this issue and the argument that's really been going on? What is the rights of military operation to protect civilian? There is laws that govern this. We have here with us Professor Peter Thompson, and he is studying this issue. We're going to talk about the implication of using human shield argument and self-defense argument. Welcome to Bulahdar, Mr. Thompson. I know you've been hearing this for a long time. It's not the first time the Israelis use self-defense and argument. Even the American administration, even the media itself, using self-defense. And also, what is when we're talking about the likelihood when you have a military operation of killing civilians, what governs that? And when you know, in fact, that when you are having this operation, when you send down missiles or attacks a building or attacks, you're going to kill civilians. Are you violating any law of any source but when you actually go and do it?
A couple of things. We're going to talk about Gaza today.
Yeah.
But a lot of these principles we'll talk about in terms of self-defense, international law, justifiable war, those sorts of things, apply to any conflict. And so think, when we talk about these things, about the justifications given for Iraq and for drones.
Drones.
They're all very related, same concepts. So for self-defense to apply, you need necessity. You have to do this, otherwise...
You have to have a real threat?
Yeah, otherwise you are going to be,
an aggressor.
Yeah, and where this all really comes from is self-defense, in the regular law, on the streets, between people. It's called justifiable homicide there, rather than justifiable war. So you need necessity. It has to be imminent. That is, you don't have a chance to do something else. And it has to be proportional. Starts out like if you and I were on the street and you were going to punch me and I pulled out a .45 and blew you halfway across the block.
That happened in New York last week.
Yeah, I did, right. But that's not proportional. Now we're talking about proportionality.
Well, how do you find that?
In a much, much greater...
Yeah.
Well, you use some statistics.
I see.
And there are, rockets coming in to Jerusalem from Hamas. And now what is going back is...
Invasion.
Yeah, not only a ground invasion, but you can look on the YouTube right now on the internet. I did last night, because you told me to do some research.
Of course.
And you can see there's a 5-story apartment building, and it gets hit with a little missile on the top of it. Doesn't really hurt the building much, but it shakes it. And that's the warning missile that they are firing, because the defense ministry says that gives the innocent people a chance to get out. Then about 60 seconds later, the big missile comes in, the explosive missile, and the whole building is gone.
So people can leave in 60 seconds?
Well, it occurred to me that if the building is targeted because there are Hamas militants in there, does that mean that a mom and 4 kids can get out in 60 seconds, but the Hamas militant couldn't?
So yeah, that's an interesting question. So when you give a warning, you're also given a warning for whatever you allegedly there is a military in there. Could
Right.
a warning for anybody.
Right.
So what's the logic behind this? Are they lip serving or so propaganda? They say we give these people, a warning to leave, and
Yeah,
even if they have time to leave, where to? Everything has been hit. Hospital, schools, ambulance. So where would they go?
Yeah, there are two things that Israel is trying to anticipate. One is proportionality, and one is discrimination. Those are requirements. What really is the best use of these requirements, the best statement, and the best execution generally, traditionally, are the rules of engagement by the U.S. Army. They have it written up and understood and have war colleges and all that sort of thing. Now, whether or not it got used properly, in some of our other, like Hiroshima or like shock and awe in Iraq, I mean, there were, gross violations of those things, in my opinion. But what Israel is trying to do by leafleting, making phone calls, and sending these non-explosive missiles is anticipating the complaints that they are violating the international law criteria of proportionality and discrimination. And so really what the problem is having an invasion and a bombardment in a heavily populated area. There is no way any country, any time, with any of these little mechanisms, sophisticated technology, can possibly minimize civilian casualties. Let me just say one more thing about that. Up to World War I, the people who got killed in wars, tragically, were soldiers.
Mostly.
Almost exclusively. High percentage. Ever since then, the percentage of civilians has gone up and up and up to the point that the high percentage of people who get killed in wars now are civilians.
Well, you have more than 7,000 or 1,300 are getting killed, and mostly 80% of them are civilian, even more. And then you have the Israelis, now 60-something, only 3 civilians. So it seems to me that the Hamas are more accurate and more care about civilian than the Israelis.
Well, they don't have as big rockets.
Yeah, but whatever. Most of the Israelis get killed on direct contact.
Just for clarification, what Hamas is doing is just as repugnant in terms of breaking the law as what Israel is doing. Israel is just doing it on a much, much larger scale because they have a huge military machine.
When you are moving in to a country, invade that country, and this country is under your jurisdiction, you are an occupier. Gaza has been occupied by the Israelis. Isn't it the law, international law, require the Israelis in responsibility to save civilians and all that?
Right. There are, under the Geneva Additional Protocols, they talk about the principle of the recognition of basic human dignity and civil rights of civilians in occupied territories. That's a quote. So not only don't kill them, give them dignity, respect their civil rights. So in an occupied situation, the requirements for the occupying country are much, much higher than in...
two countries are fighting each other.
Two combat.
So would that muster to a war crime? When does it get to a war crime? Or what are the conditions to qualify this as a war crime?
Let's think about Hiroshima. Right after Hiroshima, President Truman came on and he said, Hiroshima was targeted. He said, this is a great day in American history. Yeah. And we targeted Hiroshima because it was a military center. I visited Hiroshima and the museums there and looked at the numbers and looked at the preparation, and it is the most diabolical test of a atomic weapon imaginable. And, largely everyone was exterminated who was anywhere near the blast. Every time something like that happens, it's impossible to discriminate and it's impossible to be proportional because you're destroying everything. Every time you're in a largely populated area, it's impossible not to violate those principles of justifiable war and therefore a war crime. Now, when are war crimes prosecuted? I'd ask you a question.
When they are challenging the Western interest.
Probably. Or when you're the winner.
Yeah, when you're the winner.
Then you can charge a war crime.
Yeah.
And so wars are filled with war crimes on both sides.
Yeah.
But, the politics, the politicians talk about international law when it supports their position.
Yeah.
And the politicians and the military ignore international law and say it's not enforceable. Domestic law is enforceable.
So the United Nations is accomplice in all of this. I mean, it seems to me they are just there to cover up for the aggressors.
I don't know that they
People
cover up.
use their names only when they want to persecute an enemy. Use it when they want to have a cover up for invading Iraq, persecuting Saddam Hussein, in Yugoslavia, and it seems like the United Nations until today, I don't know if maybe I'm missing something, really done anything for the the loser or the anti or the West violators of international law.
I think what the UN has been doing has been objecting. And that's the good and the bad, because the objections are proper and they're calling, particularly,
they equate Gaza
to a nation.
To a nation. They equate Hamas always Israelis and a militant Hamas. It's like
a country.
Israel is not militant, the IDF is not militant. So I don't know what the language is even. They are been victim of using the same language.
The UN has passed all sorts of resolutions against Israel atrocities and aggressions.
Yeah.
The problem with the UN is no teeth. No enforceability. It's the same problem with international law. Mm-hmm. It can be talked about forever, but if it doesn't have any
no
teeth,
backbone either.
the only time you have war crimes prosecutions is like when you set up a special tribunal for Yugoslavia or Rwanda or Nuremberg, those sorts of things. And they're in that business, but it's taken a long time to get an international criminal court or war crimes tribunals.
Professor Thompson, thank you so much. Always
My
pleasure to have you here, educate us about all of this. Professor Peter Thompson, and we're talking about the liability of an occupier or an invader of protecting civilian. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.